The champagne bubbles rose lazily in my glass as I watched 3 generations of Blackwoods mill around Dad's living room. 70 years on this earth, and Robert Blackwood Sr. still commanded attention like a retired general inspecting troops. Which, come to think of it, wasn't far from the truth. "William, your father's cake is absolutely stunning," Aunt Shirley gushed, cornering me near the mantelpiece. "Catherine outdid herself this time." I nodded, forcing a smile. She has a gift. My wife Catherine beamed from across the room, accepting compliments on her 3-tier masterpiece: chocolate ganache, vanilla buttercream, and enough fondant roses to stock a funeral home. Her bakery downtown had been struggling lately, but nobody could question her talent with sugar and flour. "The decorations are gorgeous too," Shirley continued. "Those gold ribbons must have cost a fortune." "Nothing's too good for Dad's 70th, I replied automatically, though my attention had drifted to Catherine's phone. She'd been glued to the thing all morning, fingers dancing across the screen with unusual urgency. When I'd asked about it over coffee, she'd waved me off with something about coordinating last-minute party details. Elizabeth, my younger sister, appeared at my elbow with her trademark knowing look. At 32, she possessed an unsettling ability to read people that had served her well in her career as a social worker. Right now, that laser focus was aimed squarely at me. "You look tense," she observed quietly. "It's a big party. Lots of moving parts." Her gaze swept the room, lingering on Catherine. "Speaking of moving parts, what's the story with her friend?" I followed her line of sight to where Catherine was deep in conversation with Jason Mitchell, a gym-toned specimen in his late 30s who'd shown up fashionably late with expensive wine and practiced charm. They'd met at some networking event for small business owners, and Catherine had insisted on inviting him. "He offered to help with setup," I said. "Seemed eager to pitch in." "I bet he did." Elizabeth's tone carried that particular edge she reserved for people she didn't trust. "He looks at her like he's reading a menu." Before I could respond, Dad's booming voice cut through the chatter. "Gather round, everyone. Time for the birthday boy to make a speech." The crowd shuffled toward the center of the room, drinks raised expectantly. Dad stood beside his leather recliner, the same chair he'd occupied for weekend football games throughout my childhood. His hair had gone completely silver now, but his eyes remained sharp as ever. 70 years, he began, his voice carrying easily through the room. 7 decades of watching this family grow, watching this town change, watching the world spin faster than any of us expected. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled relatives. I caught Catherine checking her phone again, a small frown creasing her forehead. "But some things don't change," Dad continued. "Family loyalty, honesty between husband and wife, the importance of knowing who your real friends are." His eyes found mine across the room, and something in his expression made my chest tighten. Dad had always possessed an uncanny ability to sense trouble brewing, a skill honed through decades of running his construction business and raising 2 headstrong children. "So here's to another year of truth, family, and keeping our eyes open." He raised his glass. "Cheers!" The room erupted in applause and clinking glasses. I drained my champagne in one gulp, the bubbles burning my throat. When I looked up, Catherine was nowhere to be seen. "Where'd she go?" I asked Elizabeth. "Bathroom, I think. She looked a little pale during Dad's speech." I made my way through the crowd, accepting handshakes and birthday wishes for Dad. The downstairs bathroom was empty, door standing open. I climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, calling Catherine's name. "In here," came her muffled reply from the guest bedroom. "I'm not feeling well." I found her sitting on the edge of the bed, one hand pressed to her forehead in a gesture of theatrical distress. Her color did look off, though something about the performance felt rehearsed. "What's wrong?" I asked, settling beside her. "Headache. It came on suddenly during your father's speech. I think I need to lie down for a few minutes." "Should I get you some aspirin?" That would be wonderful. She squeezed my hand, her wedding ring catching the afternoon light streaming through the window. I hate missing the party, but this is really hitting me hard. I kissed her forehead, tasting the faint salt of perspiration. Rest up. I'll check on you in a bit. Downstairs, the party had shifted into full swing. Dad held court near the fireplace, regaling his brother with stories from their youth. I grabbed a bottle of aspirin from the kitchen medicine cabinet and was heading back upstairs when Jason intercepted me. "Everything okay with Catherine?" he asked, his concern appearing genuine. I noticed she looked unwell. "Just a headache. I was bringing her some aspirin. Here, let me take that up to her." He plucked the bottle from my hands before I could protest. "You should stay down here with your guests. I'll make sure she's comfortable." Something cold settled in my stomach, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly why. Jason was being helpful, considerate even, yet Elizabeth's earlier comment echoed in my mind. He looks at her like he's reading a menu. "That's very kind of you," I managed. "No problem at all. Catherine's been such a good friend since we met. The least I can do is return the favor." He bounded up the stairs 2 at a time, leaving me standing in the hallway with an inexplicable sense of unease. Through the living room archway, I could see Dad watching me with that same penetrating stare from earlier. The next 40 minutes crawled by like hours. I made small talk with relatives, helped serve cake, and fielded questions about Catherine's absence. All the while, a growing awareness gnawed at the edges of my consciousness. Elizabeth appeared at my side again, this time carrying 2 plates of cake. "Jason's been upstairs for quite a while," she observed casually. I checked my watch. She was right. Delivering aspirin and checking on a sick person shouldn't require nearly an hour of attention. "Maybe she's really unwell," I suggested, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. "Maybe." Elizabeth set down the plates and fixed me with that penetrating stare she'd inherited from Dad. "Or maybe we should go check on them ourselves." My phone buzzed with a text notification. Dad's new security system, installed just last month after a rash of break-ins in the neighborhood, sent alerts whenever motion was detected in certain areas of the house. I'd been meaning to adjust the sensitivity settings, but hadn't gotten around to it yet. The notification showed activity in the guest bedroom, continuous activity for the past 38 minutes. "William?" Elizabeth's voice seemed to come from very far away. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I stared at the phone screen, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. The security system didn't just send alerts, it recorded everything, every movement, every sound, every moment of activity in that upstairs room. "I need to check something," I said quietly. Elizabeth followed me into Dad's study where the main security monitor displayed feeds from cameras throughout the house. I navigated to the guest bedroom camera and scrolled back to when Jason had gone upstairs. What I saw in those first few minutes made my hands shake. Catherine, suddenly recovered from her headache, greeting Jason at the bedroom door. The embrace that lasted far too long. The way she looked at him as he closed the door behind them. I stopped the playback before it could go any further. "Oh, William," Elizabeth whispered. "I'm so sorry." The room spun around me as 36 years of life experience crashed into this single moment of clarity. Catherine's recent late nights at the bakery, the new perfume, the secretive phone calls, the way she'd insisted on inviting Jason to Dad's party, all of it suddenly made perfect, horrible sense. "What are you going to do?" Elizabeth asked. I looked through the study window at the guests mingling in our backyard, at Dad holding court near the flower garden Mom had planted before she passed, at the life I'd built, the trust I'd placed in the woman upstairs who was currently destroying everything we'd shared. "I'm going to give Dad the best birthday present he's ever received," I said quietly. "William, truth, Elizabeth." He said it himself during the toast. Truth and keeping our eyes open. I saved the security footage to my phone, my hands steadier now than they'd been in months. Some decisions once made, bring a strange kind of peace. This was one of them. The party was about to take a very different turn. I rejoined the party with newfound clarity, every detail sharp and immediate. Uncle Frank's booming laugh near the piano, Aunt Shirley's third helping of cake, Dad's friend Harold recounting fishing stories that grew more elaborate with each telling. And upstairs, my wife of 8 years was redefining the meaning of friendship with Jason Mitchell. "There you are," Dad said as I approached his circle near the fireplace. We were wondering if Catherine was feeling better. "Still resting," I replied, surprised by how normal my voice sounded. "Jason's keeping an eye on her." "Good man, that Jason," Harold chimed in. "Thoughtful of him to help out." "Very thoughtful," I agreed, taking a long sip of my fresh drink. The whiskey burned away the last traces of naive trust I'd been carrying around. Elizabeth materialized beside me with practiced casualness, though I caught the worried glances she kept shooting toward the staircase. She'd always been protective of me, even when we were kids. The 4-year age gap had made her feel responsible somehow, a burden she'd never quite shaken. "William," she said quietly, "maybe we should—" "Let them finish," I interrupted, my voice barely audible. "Some things need to run their natural course." She stared at me with something approaching alarm. "What are you planning?" Before I could answer, the sound of footsteps on the stairs drew everyone's attention. Jason appeared first, his hair slightly mussed, shirt untucked on one side. He'd clearly made an effort to compose himself, but the satisfied expression on his face told its own story. Catherine followed a few steps behind, moving with the careful deliberation of someone trying very hard to appear normal. Her color had returned. In fact, she practically glowed. The headache, it seemed, had been miraculously cured. "Feeling better, sweetheart?" I called out, raising my glass in her direction. "Much better," she replied, smoothing her dress as she descended the final steps. Jason was so helpful. He stayed with me until the headache passed. "That's what friends are for," Jason added, accepting congratulations from several guests for his attentiveness. I watched this performance with the detached fascination of an anthropologist observing some exotic mating ritual. The casual lies, the practiced smiles, the way they carefully avoided looking directly at each other, now that they were back in public view. Dad caught my eye from across the room and raised his eyebrows slightly. Nothing got past the old man. He'd clearly noticed the same inconsistencies I had, though he couldn't know the full scope of what had just occurred upstairs. "Well," Dad announced, clapping his hands together, "now that everyone's feeling better, how about we move on to presents?" The suggestion was met with enthusiastic approval. Gifts had been piling up on the dining room table throughout the afternoon, everything from fishing gear to photo albums documenting 7 decades of Blackwood family history. As the crowd migrated toward the dining room, I hung back, ostensibly to refill my drink. In reality, I was accessing the security footage on my phone, fast-forwarding through the 43 minutes Jason and Catherine had spent in the guest bedroom. What I saw confirmed my worst suspicions, and then some. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a single lapse in judgment. The familiarity between them, the practiced ease of their interaction, spoke to something that had been going on for much longer than a single afternoon. My marriage, I realized, had been over for months. I'd just been too trusting or too naive to recognize the signs. "William?" Catherine appeared at my side, her hand resting lightly on my arm. "Are you all right? You look distracted." I studied her face, searching for any trace of guilt or remorse. Instead, I found only practiced concern and what might have been genuine affection. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. How could someone compartmentalize so completely? "Just thinking about Dad," I said. 70 years. It's a milestone. He looks wonderful for his age. You're lucky to have him." "Yes," I agreed, watching Jason across the room as he charmed a group of my female relatives. "Family loyalty is everything. Dad taught me that. Something flickered in Catherine's eyes, too quick to interpret, but there nonetheless. Of course. Family first, always. The gift opening ceremony proceeded with typical Blackwood enthusiasm. Dad received fishing lures, books, a new recliner from all of us kids pooled together, and enough cologne to stock a department store. He played his role perfectly, expressing gratitude for each present while maintaining the gruff exterior that had intimidated neighborhood kids for decades. I found myself studying the assembled faces, wondering who else might have noticed the extended absence upstairs. Uncle Frank seemed oblivious, focused entirely on his ongoing debate with Harold about baseball statistics. Aunt Shirley was too busy organizing the gift wrap cleanup to pay attention to interpersonal dynamics. But Elizabeth kept shooting worried glances in my direction, and I caught Dad watching Catherine and Jason with the same calculating expression he'd worn during difficult business negotiations. "All right, everyone," Dad announced as the last present was unwrapped. "I think it's time for the birthday toast. The real one this time." The crowd reassembled in the living room, drinks refreshed and voices slightly louder than they'd been an hour earlier. Catherine positioned herself near the piano, Jason a carefully calculated distance away. They'd clearly discussed the importance of maintaining appearances. I moved toward the entertainment center, where Dad's new smart TV dominated one wall. The same TV I'd helped him set up last month, complete with wireless connectivity to every device in the house, including my phone. "Before Dad speaks," I announced, my voice cutting through the chatter, "I'd like to say something." The room quieted expectantly. Elizabeth shot me a look of pure panic, but I was beyond the point of backing down. Some moments demand absolute commitment, and this was one of them. 70 years of life teaches you a lot about people, I began, my phone hidden in my palm as I navigated to the security footage. About trust, loyalty, and the importance of seeing things as they really are. Catherine smiled encouragingly from her position near the piano. Jason nodded along with the sentiment, probably thinking I was building toward some heartfelt tribute to family values. They had no idea what was coming. "Dad always taught me that truth is the foundation of everything worthwhile," I continued, connecting my phone to the TV with a few quick taps. "Marriage, friendship, family, they all depend on honesty." The screen flickered to life behind me, still showing the main menu of the security system. Several guests glanced at it curiously, but most remained focused on my impromptu speech. "So, in the spirit of truth and family loyalty," I said, my finger hovering over the play button, "I'd like to share something that I think perfectly captures the importance of seeing people as they really are." Elizabeth started moving toward me, her face pale with understanding. But she was too far away, and I was already pressing play. The guest bedroom appeared on the 75-inch screen in high definition. The timestamp showed 45 minutes earlier. Catherine suddenly recovered from her headache, greeting Jason at the door. The room erupted in gasps, shouts, and the distinctive sound of Aunt Shirley's drink hitting the hardwood floor. I didn't need to watch the screen. I'd seen enough already. Instead, I focused on the faces around me, cataloging reactions with the same detached fascination I'd felt earlier. Catherine's expression cycled through shock, horror, and finally a desperate kind of panic as she lunged toward the TV. But Uncle Frank, moving with surprising speed for a man his age, blocked her path. "Let it play," he said grimly. Jason made a break for the front door, but Dad's construction crew buddies had formed an impromptu blockade. "Stay for cake," one of them suggested with a grin that held no warmth whatsoever. After about 10 seconds of footage, more than enough to establish what had been happening upstairs, I stopped the playback. The silence that followed was deafening. Dad stood slowly from his recliner, surveying the wreckage of his birthday party with the calm assessment of a man who'd seen his share of human nature's darker impulses. Finally, he began to laugh. It started as a low chuckle, then built into full-throated amusement that filled the suddenly quiet room. "Well," he said, wiping his eyes, "that's certainly the most memorable birthday present I've ever received." He looked directly at me, his expression mixing approval with something that might have been pride. "Truth," he said simply, "just like you promised." Catherine found her voice at last. "William, I can explain—" "No need," I interrupted, pocketing my phone. "The footage explains everything perfectly." The party was over, but in many ways it was just beginning. The aftermath of my impromptu presentation unfolded with the slow-motion inevitability of a building collapse. Catherine fled upstairs, her footsteps echoing through the sudden quiet. Jason remained trapped near the front door, surrounded by a circle of my father's friends who seemed to be enjoying his discomfort immensely. "Well," Uncle Frank said, breaking the silence, "I guess that explains why she looked so much better when she came downstairs." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room. Aunt Shirley, still staring at the now blank TV screen, shook her head slowly. "In my day, people had the decency to conduct their affairs somewhere other than family gatherings." "Times change, Shirley," Dad replied, settling back into his recliner with obvious satisfaction. "But stupidity remains constant." Elizabeth approached me cautiously, as if I might detonate at any moment. "William, are you okay?" "Never better," I said, and meant it. The crushing weight I'd been carrying without realizing it, months of subtle deceptions, half-truths, and instinctive doubts, had lifted completely. "I feel like I can breathe again." Jason finally found his voice. "Look, everyone, this is all a misunderstanding." "Son," Dad interrupted, his tone carrying the authority of 7 decades. "I've seen a lot of misunderstandings in my time. That wasn't one of them." The crowd began to thin as relatives made their excuses and headed for the door. Some offered awkward condolences, others simply avoided eye contact. Within 20 minutes, only the core family remained: Dad, Elizabeth, Uncle Frank, and me, and Jason, who seemed to be having trouble processing his sudden change in circumstances. "I think," Dad said conversationally, "it might be time for Mr. Mitchell to find somewhere else to be." "Absolutely," Jason agreed quickly. "I'll just grab my coat and—" "Your coat's right there," Uncle Frank pointed out helpfully. "Door's that way. Don't let it hit you on the way out." Jason's departure was swift and silent. Through the front window, I watched him practically sprint to his car, fumbling with his keys in his haste to escape. The sight should have given me satisfaction, but I felt only a strange emptiness. 36 years old, I said to no one in particular, and I'm just now learning what my marriage actually was. "Better late than never," Dad replied. "Some men go their whole lives without seeing the truth." Elizabeth settled onto the couch beside me. "What happens now?" "Now?" I considered the question while listening to Catherine's footsteps pacing back and forth in the bedroom above us. "Now I figure out what comes next." The sound of a door slamming upstairs was followed by rapid footsteps on the stairs. Catherine appeared in the living room doorway, her face streaked with tears, but her posture defiant. "I need to talk to my husband," she announced, privately. The remaining family members exchanged glances. Uncle Frank started to rise, but Dad waved him back down. "This is my house," the old man said calmly. "If you want privacy, there's a perfectly good guest bedroom upstairs, though I understand you're already familiar with that option." Catherine's face flushed crimson. "Robert, please. This is between William and me." "Was it between you and William when you were entertaining Mr. Mitchell in my guest room during my birthday party?" Dad's voice remained conversational, but steel lurked beneath the surface. "Because from where I sit, you made this everyone's business the moment you decided to conduct your affair under my roof." "It's not an affair," Catherine protested. "It's complicated, but it's not what you think." I found myself genuinely curious about how she planned to explain away 43 minutes of high-definition security footage. What is it then? She looked around the room, apparently hoping for support that wasn't forthcoming. Jason and we have a connection, but we've never acted on it before today. Today being my father's 70th birthday party, I said, while you were supposedly suffering from a sudden headache. The headache was real, but when Jason came upstairs to check on me, we started talking and things just happened. Elizabeth made a sound that might have been a laugh or a snort. Things just happened for 43 minutes. We were talking most of that time, Catherine insisted. Sure you were, Uncle Frank muttered. I studied my wife's face, searching for any trace of genuine remorse. Instead, I found defensive anger and what looked suspiciously like resentment that she'd been caught. How long has this been going on? I asked. I told you today was the first time we… Catherine. My voice carried enough warning to stop her mid-sentence. I've got 43 minutes of security footage that suggests you and Jason are very comfortable with each other. That kind of familiarity doesn't develop in a single afternoon. She opened her mouth to protest again, then seemed to think better of it. For the first time since this whole mess began, I saw something that might have been genuine emotion cross her features. 6 months, she admitted quietly. The number hit me like a physical blow. 6 months of lies, deception, and carefully orchestrated betrayals. 6 months of coming home to a woman who was living a completely separate life behind my back. 6 months, I repeated, letting the words settle in the suddenly quiet room. William, you have to understand. I understand perfectly. I stood up, surprised by how steady my legs felt. You've been lying to me for half a year. You brought your lover to my father's birthday party, and you conducted your affair in my childhood home while my family was downstairs celebrating. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. I walked to the window, looking out at the backyard where Mom's flower garden was just beginning to show signs of spring growth. What I don't understand is why you didn't just ask for a divorce. The question seemed to catch her off guard. I wasn't sure what I wanted. Well, Dad interjected from his recliner, I'd say you made your position pretty clear this afternoon. Catherine turned on him with sudden fury. This is your fault. If I hadn't installed those cameras, you'd still be lying to my son. Dad's voice remained calm, but his eyes had gone cold. The cameras didn't create the problem, young lady. They just documented it. I found myself thinking about the security system Dad had insisted on installing after the neighborhood break-ins. At the time, I'd thought he was being paranoid. Now I realized he might have saved me from years of additional deception. I want you out of the house, I said without turning around. William, please, we can work through this. Out of the house, Catherine, tonight. You can't just throw me out. I live there too. I finally turned to face her. You live there when you're not with Jason. Since you seem to prefer his company, I'm sure he'll be happy to provide accommodations. Elizabeth cleared her throat. Catherine, maybe you should call someone to come get you, a friend or family member. I'll call Jason, Catherine said defiantly. Perfect, I replied. That should make things simple. As Catherine fumbled for her phone, I found myself thinking about the practical aspects of what came next. Divorce proceedings, property division, the inevitable gossip that would follow us both through our small town. But underneath the practical concerns, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: relief. The truth, as Dad had noted in his earlier toast, really was the foundation of everything worthwhile. And now that I finally knew the truth about my marriage, I could start building something better on more solid ground. Even if that something was just my own life, lived honestly for the first time in longer than I cared to admit. Jason's return to collect Catherine provided the evening's final act of unintentional comedy. He crept up the front walkway like a man approaching a minefield, clearly hoping to avoid any additional encounters with my family. Dad, positioned strategically in his recliner with a clear view of the front door, watched Jason's approach with obvious amusement. "Looks like your knight in shining armor has arrived," he announced. Catherine had spent the past hour packing a suitcase while maintaining a steady stream of accusations and justifications. According to her evolving narrative, I was controlling, emotionally distant, and apparently responsible for driving her into Jason's arms through my failure to appreciate her properly. "He makes me feel alive," she declared, dragging her suitcase down the stairs. "When was the last time you made me feel special, William?" "When was the last time you gave me the chance?" I replied. Hard to make someone feel special when they're constantly checking their phone for messages from their lover. Elizabeth and Uncle Frank had positioned themselves near the kitchen, close enough to intervene if necessary, but far enough away to maintain plausible deniability about eavesdropping. Dad showed no such pretense. He was clearly enjoying the show. The doorbell rang with the tentative, apologetic tone that somehow perfectly captured Jason's current state of mind. Catherine rushed to answer it, as if speed might somehow minimize the awkwardness of the situation. "Hi," Jason said quietly when she opened the door. His eyes darted nervously around the room, taking inventory of witnesses to his humiliation. "Jason," Dad called out cheerfully. "Good to see you again so soon. How's that headache remedy working out?" Jason's face went 3 shades redder. "Mr. Blackwood, I want you to know that I never intended—" "Son, I'm 70 years old. I've heard every excuse in the book, and most of them twice. Save your breath." Catherine grabbed Jason's arm possessively. "We're leaving now. William, I'll be back tomorrow to get the rest of my things." "No," I said simply. She stopped in the doorway, suitcase in one hand, Jason's arm in the other. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean you're not coming back tomorrow, or any other day. Whatever you want from the house, get it now." "That's completely unreasonable." "What's unreasonable," Uncle Frank interjected from the kitchen, "is conducting an affair in your father-in-law's guest room during his birthday party." Jason shifted uncomfortably. "Look, maybe Catherine and I should talk about this somewhere else." "Excellent idea," Dad agreed. "I hear the parking lot at the Motel 6 is lovely this time of year." I walked to the closet and retrieved Catherine's winter coat, her tennis racket, and the box of personal items she'd been accumulating on the hall table for months. "This should cover the essentials." "William, you're being ridiculous. We need to discuss property division, financial arrangements. We'll discuss those things through lawyers." The finality in my voice seemed to penetrate her defensive anger. For the first time since the security footage had played, Catherine looked genuinely uncertain. "This is really what you want?" she asked. I considered the question seriously. 3 hours ago, I'd been planning to spend the evening cleaning up party dishes and listening to Catherine complain about various relatives. Now I was ending my marriage in front of an audience. "What I wanted," I said carefully, "was a wife who didn't lie to me for 6 months. What I wanted was to make it through my father's birthday party without discovering that my marriage was a fraud. What I wanted was to trust the person I'd been sharing a bed with. You can still have that." "No, Catherine, I can't. Not with you." She stood in the doorway for another long moment, perhaps waiting for someone to offer her an alternative or suggest a compromise. But the room remained silent except for the ticking of Dad's old grandfather clock. Finally, she hefted her suitcase and walked out into the evening air. Jason followed a step behind, still looking like a man who couldn't quite believe how quickly his day had deteriorated. "Catherine," I called after her. She turned back hopefully. "Leave your house key on the porch." Her face crumpled, but she dug the key from her purse and placed it carefully on the wooden bench beside the front door. Then she and Jason walked to his car, without looking back. I watched them drive away, their headlights disappearing around the corner that led toward the main road. 8 years of marriage, reduced to a single suitcase and a key on a porch bench. "Well," Dad said, breaking the silence, "that was certainly educational." Elizabeth approached me cautiously. "How are you feeling?" I took inventory of my emotional state, surprised by what I found there. Tired, relieved, and strangely optimistic. Optimistic. For the first time in months, I know exactly where I stand. No more wondering why Catherine seems distant, or why she's always on her phone, or why she's been working late so often. The mystery is solved. Uncle Frank emerged from the kitchen with 4 glasses and a bottle of Dad's good whiskey. "Seems like the kind of evening that calls for a proper drink." "I'll drink to that," Dad agreed, accepting his glass with obvious satisfaction. "To my son, who handled that situation with more class than it deserved." "To family," Elizabeth added, raising her glass. "To truth," I concluded, thinking of Dad's earlier toast and how prophetic it had turned out to be. We drank in comfortable silence, 4 people who'd witnessed something ugly, but had emerged from it with a clearer understanding of what really mattered. "So what happens now?" Elizabeth asked eventually. "Now I figure out what my life looks like without Catherine in it," I said. "Probably should have done that exercise 6 months ago, but better late than never." Dad chuckled. "Your mother used to say that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, but the second best time was today. Mom was a wise woman." "She was indeed, and she would have been proud of how you handled yourself tonight." I thought about that as I helped clean up the remnants of the birthday party. Mom had died 5 years earlier, but her influence still permeated the house through her garden, her furniture choices, and the family traditions she'd established over decades of marriage to Dad. She'd also been the one to teach me that respect was earned through actions, not words. Catherine had spent 6 months proving through her actions that she didn't respect our marriage, our family, or me. The security footage had simply provided the documentation. As I loaded the dishwasher with cake plates and champagne glasses, I found myself thinking about tomorrow. For the first time in months, I had no idea what Catherine would be doing, where she would be, or who she would be with. And I discovered that I didn't care. The realization was liberating in a way I hadn't expected. Whatever came next, lawyers, paperwork, the inevitable small-town gossip, I would face it with a clear conscience and complete honesty about what had happened. Dad's birthday party had indeed been memorable, just not in the way any of us had anticipated. But as I turned off the kitchen lights and headed upstairs to what would now be my bedroom instead of our bedroom, I realized that some gifts come disguised as disasters. Truth, as it turned out, was the best present any of us could have received, even if it had come wrapped in betrayal and delivered via security camera footage. The longest toast of my life was finally over, and I was ready to start the next chapter.